The Man in the Iron Mask by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter II. How Mouston had become fatter without giving Porthos notice thereof, and of the troubles which consequently befell that worthy gentleman. Since the departure of Athos for Blois, Porthos and D'Artagnan were seldom together. One was occupied with harassing duties for the king, the other had been making many purchases of furniture which he intended to forward to his estate, and by aid of which he hoped to establish in his various residences something of the courtly luxury he had witnessed in all its dazzling brightness in his majesty's society. D'Artagnan, ever faithful, one morning during an interval of service thought about Porthos, and being uneasy at not having heard anything of him for a fortnight, directed his steps towards his hotel, and pounced upon him just as he was getting up. The worthy baron had a pensive, nay, more than pensive, melancholy air. He was sitting on his bed, only half dressed, and with legs dangling over the edge, contemplating a host of garments, which, with their fringes, lace, embroidery, and slashes of ill assorted hues, were strewed all over the floor. Porthos, sad and reflective as La Fontaine's air, did not observe D'Artagnan's entrance, which was, moreover, screened at this moment by M. Mouston, whose personal corpulency, quite enough at any time to hide one man from another, was effectually doubled by a scarlet coat which the intendant was holding up for his master's inspection by the sleeves, that he might the better see it all over. D'Artagnan stopped at the threshold and looked in at the pensive Porthos, and then, as the sight of the innumerable garments strewing the floor caused mighty sighs to heave the bosom of that excellent gentleman, D'Artagnan thought it time to put an end to these dismal reflections, and coughed by way of announcing himself. "Ah!" exclaimed Porthos, whose countenance brightened with joy. "Ah! ah! Here is D'Artagnan. I shall then get hold of an idea." At these words, Mouston, doubting what was going on behind him, got out of the way, smiling kindly at the friend of his master, who thus found himself freed from the material obstacle which had prevented his reaching D'Artagnan. Porthos made his sturdy knees crack again in rising, and crossing the room in 2 strides, found himself face to face with his friend, whom he folded to his breast with a force of affection that seemed to increase with every day. "Ah!" he repeated, "you are always welcome, dear friend, but just now you are more welcome than ever." "But you seem to have the megrims here," exclaimed D'Artagnan. Porthos replied by a look expressive of dejection. "Well, then, tell me all about it, Porthos, my friend, unless it is a secret." "In the first place," returned Porthos, "you know I have no secrets from you. This, then, is what saddens me."
"Wait a minute, Porthos. Let me first get rid of all this litter of satin and velvet."
"Oh, never mind," said Porthos, contemptuously, "it is all trash." "Trash, Porthos! Cloth at 25 livres an ell? Gorgeous satin! Regal velvet!" "Then you think these clothes are splendid, Porthos, splendid! I'll wager that you alone in France have so many; and suppose you never had any more made, and were to live to be 100 years of age, which wouldn't astonish me in the very least, you could still wear a new dress the day of your death, without being obliged to see the nose of a single tailor from now till then." Porthos shook his head. "Come, my friend," said D'Artagnan, "this unnatural melancholy in you frightens me. My dear Porthos, pray get it out then, and the sooner the better." "Yes, my friend, so I will, if, indeed, it is possible."
"Perhaps you have received bad news from Bracieux?"
"No, they have felled the wood, and it has yielded a third more than the estimate."
"Then there has been a falling off in the pools of Pierrefonds?"
"No, my friend, they have been fished, and there is enough left to stock all the pools in the neighborhood."
"Perhaps your estate at Vallon has been destroyed by an earthquake?"
"No, my friend; on the contrary, the ground was struck with lightning 100 paces from the chateau, and a fountain sprung up in a place entirely destitute of water.
What in the world is the matter, then? The fact is, I have received an invitation for the fete at Vaux," said Porthos, with a lugubrious expression. "Well, do you complain of that? The king has caused 100 mortal heartburnings among the courtiers by refusing invitations; and so, my dear friend, you are really going to Vaux?" "Indeed I am." "You will see a magnificent sight." "Alas! I doubt it, though." "Everything that is grand in France will be brought together there." "Ah!" cried Porthos, tearing out a lock of hair in his despair. "Eh? Good heavens, are you ill?" cried D'Artagnan. "I am as firm as the Pont Neuf. It isn't that." "But what is it, then?" "'Tis that I have no clothes." D'Artagnan stood petrified. "No clothes? Porthos, no clothes!" he cried, "when I see at least 50 suits on the floor." "50, truly, but not one which fits me." "What! not one that fits you? But are you not measured, then, when you give an order?" "To be sure he is," answered Mouston; "but unfortunately I have gotten stouter." "What! you stouter?" "So much so that I am now bigger than the baron. Would you believe it, monsieur?" "Parbleu! it seems to me that it is quite evident." "Do you see, stupid?" said Porthos; "that is quite evident." "Be still, my dear Porthos," resumed D'Artagnan, becoming slightly impatient. "I don't understand why your clothes should not fit you, because Mouston has grown stouter." "I am going to explain it," said Porthos. "You remember having related to me the story of the Roman general Antony, who had always 7 wild boars kept roasting, each cooked up to a different point, so that he might be able to have his dinner at any time of the day he chose to ask for it. Well, then, I resolved, as at any time I might be invited to court to spend a week, I resolved to have always 7 suits ready for the occasion." "Capitally reasoned, Porthos; only a man must have a fortune like yours to gratify such whims. Without counting the time lost in being measured, the fashions are always changing." "That is exactly the point," said Porthos, "in regard to which I flattered myself I had hit on a very ingenious device." "Tell me what it is, for I don't doubt your genius." "You remember what Mouston once was, then?" "Yes, when he used to call himself Mousqueton." "And you remember, too, the period when he began to grow fatter?" "No, not exactly. I beg your pardon, my good Mouston." "Oh, you are not in fault, monsieur," said Mouston, graciously. "You were in Paris, and as for us, we were at Pierrefonds." "Well, well, my dear Porthos, there was a time when Mouston began to grow fat. Is that what you wish to say?" "Yes, my friend, and I greatly rejoice over the period." "Indeed, I believe you do," exclaimed D'Artagnan. "You understand," continued Porthos, "what a world of trouble it spared for me."
"No, I don't, by any means."
"Look here, my friend. In the first place, as you have said, to be measured is a loss of time, even though it occur only once a fortnight; and then, one may be traveling, and then you wish to have 7 suits always with you. In short, I have a horror of letting any one take my measure. Confound it! Either one is a nobleman or not. To be scrutinized and scanned by a fellow who completely analyzes you by inch and line, 'tis degrading. Here, they find you too hollow; there, too prominent. They recognize your strong and weak points. See, now, when we leave the measurer's hands, we are like these strongholds whose angles and different thicknesses have been ascertained by a spy."
"In truth, my dear Porthos, you possess ideas entirely original."
"Ha! You see when a man is an engineer."
"And has fortified Belle Isle. 'Tis natural, my friend."
Well, I had an idea, which would doubtless have proved a good one, but for Mouston's carelessness." D'Artagnan glanced at Mouston, who replied by a slight movement of his body, as if to say, "You will see whether I am at all to blame in all this." "I congratulated myself, then," resumed Porthos, "at seeing Mouston get fat, and I did all I could, by means of substantial feeding, to make him stout, always in the hope that he would come to equal myself in girth, and could then be measured in my stead." "Ah!" cried D'Artagnan, "I see; that spared you both time and humiliation." "Consider my joy when, after a year and a half's judicious feeding, for I used to feed him up myself, the fellow—" "Oh, I lent a good hand myself, monsieur," said Mouston, humbly. "That's true. Consider my joy when, one morning, I perceived Mouston was obliged to squeeze in, as I once did myself, to get through the little secret door that those fools of architects had made in the chamber of the late Madame du Vallon, in the chateau of Pierrefonds. And, by the way, about that door, my friend, I should like to ask you, who know everything, why these wretches of architects, who ought to have the compasses run into them, just to remind them, came to make doorways through which nobody but thin people can pass?" "Oh, those doors," answered D'Artagnan, "were meant for gallants, and they have generally slight and slender figures." "Madame du Vallon had no gallant," answered Porthos, majestically. "Perfectly true, my friend," resumed D'Artagnan; "but the architects were probably making their calculations on a basis of the probability of your marrying again." "Ah! that is possible," said Porthos. "And now I have received an explanation of how it is that doorways are made too narrow, let us return to the subject of Mouston's fatness. But see how the two things apply to each other. I have always noticed that people's ideas run parallel. And so, observe this phenomenon, D'Artagnan. I was talking to you of Mouston, who is fat, and it led us on to Madame du Vallon." "Who was thin?" Is it not marvelous?" "My dear friend, a savant of my acquaintance, M. Costard, has made the same observation as you have, and he calls the process by some Greek name which I forget." "What! my remark is not then original?" cried Porthos, astounded. "I thought I was the discoverer." "My friend, the fact was known before Aristotle's days; that is to say, nearly 2000 years ago." "Well, well, 'tis no less true," said Porthos, delighted at the idea of having jumped to a conclusion so closely in agreement with the greatest sages of antiquity. "Wonderfully. But suppose we return to Mouston. It seems to me we have left him fattening under our very eyes." "Yes, monsieur," said Mouston. "Well," said Porthos, "Mouston fattened so well that he gratified all my hopes by reaching my standard, a fact of which I was well able to convince myself by seeing the rascal one day in a waistcoat of mine, which he had turned into a coat, a waistcoat, the mere embroidery of which was worth 100 pistoles." "'Twas only to try it on, monsieur," said Mouston. "From that moment I determined to put Mouston in communication with my tailors, and to have him measured instead of myself." "A capital idea, Porthos; but Mouston is a foot and a half shorter than you." "Exactly; they measured him down to the ground, and the end of the skirt came just below my knee."
"What a marvelous man you are, Porthos! Such a thing could happen only to you."
"Ah! yes, pay your compliments. You have ample grounds to go upon. It was exactly at that time, that is to say, nearly 2 years and a half ago, that I set out for Belle Isle, instructing Mouston, so as always to have, in every event, a pattern of every fashion, to have a coat made for himself every month."
"And did Mouston neglect complying with your instructions?"
"Ah! that was anything but right, Mouston." "No, monsieur, quite the contrary, quite the contrary." "No, he never forgot to have his coats made, but he forgot to inform me that he had gotten stouter." "But it was not my fault, monsieur; your tailor never told me." "And this to such an extent, monsieur," continued Porthos, "that the fellow in 2 years has gained 18 inches in girth, and so my last dozen coats are all too large, from a foot to a foot and a half." "But the rest, those which were made when you were of the same size?" "They are no longer the fashion, my dear friend. Were I to put them on, I should look like a fresh arrival from Siam, and as though I had been 2 years away from court." "I understand your difficulty. You have how many new suits? 9? 36? And yet not one to wear. Well, you must have a 37th made, and give the 36 to Mouston." "Ah, monsieur," said Mouston, with a gratified air, "the truth is, that monsieur has always been very generous to me." "Do you mean to insinuate that I hadn't that idea, or that I was deterred by the expense? But it wants only 2 days to the fete. I received the invitation yesterday, made Mouston post hither with my wardrobe, and only this morning discovered my misfortune. And from now till the day after to morrow there isn't a single fashionable tailor who will undertake to make me a suit." "That is to say, one covered all over with gold, isn't it?" "I wish it so! Undoubtedly, all over." "Oh, we shall manage it. You won't leave for 3 days. The invitations are for Wednesday, and this is only Sunday morning." "'Tis true, but Aramis has strongly advised me to be at Vaux 24 hours beforehand." "How? Aramis?" "Yes, it was Aramis who brought me the invitation." "Ah, to be sure, I see. You are invited on the part of M. Fouquet?" "By no means; by the king, dear friend. The letter bears the following as large as life: 'Monsieur le Baron de Vallon is informed that the king has condescended to place him on the invitation list.'" "Very good; but you leave with M. Fouquet?" "And when I think," cried Porthos, stamping on the floor, "when I think I shall have no clothes, I am ready to burst with rage. I should like to strangle somebody, or smash something." "Neither strangle anybody nor smash anything, Porthos. I will manage it all. Put on one of your 36 suits, and come with me to a tailor." "Pooh! My agent has seen them all this morning." "Even M. Percerin?" "Who is M. Percerin?" "Oh! only the king's tailor." "Oh! Ah, yes," said Porthos, who wished to appear to know the king's tailor, but now heard his name mentioned for the first time. "To M. Percerin's, by Jove! I was afraid he would be too busy." "Doubtless he will be; but be at ease, Porthos, he will do for me what he wouldn't do for another. Only you must allow yourself to be measured."
"Ah!" said Porthos, with a sigh, "'tis vexatious; but what would you have me do?"
"Do? As others do, as the king does."
"What! Do they measure the king too? Does he put up with it?"
"The king is a beau, my good friend, and so are you too, whatever you may say about it." Porthos smiled triumphantly.
"Let us go to the king's tailor," he said; "and since he measures the king, I think, by my faith, I may do worse than allow him to measure me."
Chapter 3. Who Messire Jean Percerin was. The king's tailor, Messire Jean Percerin, occupied a rather large house in the Rue Saint Honore, near the Rue de l'Arbre Sec. He was a man of great taste in elegant stuffs, embroideries, and velvets, being hereditary tailor to the king. The preferment of his house reached as far back as the time of Charles IX., from whose reign dated, as we know, fancy and bravery difficult enough to gratify. The Percerin of that period was a Huguenot, like Ambrose Paré, and had been spared by the Queen of Navarre, the beautiful Margot, as they used to write and say, too, in those days, because, in sooth, he was the only one who could make for her those wonderful riding habits which she so loved to wear, seeing that they were marvelously well suited to hide certain anatomical defects, which the Queen of Navarre used very studiously to conceal. Percerin, being saved, made, out of gratitude, some beautiful black bodices, very inexpensively indeed, for Queen Catherine, who ended by being pleased at the preservation of a Huguenot people, on whom she had long looked with detestation. But Percerin was a very prudent man, and having heard it said that there were no more dangerous sign for a Protestant than to be smiled upon by Catherine, and having observed that her smiles were more frequent than usual, he speedily turned Catholic with all his family, and having thus become irreproachable, attained the lofty position of master tailor to the crown of France. Under Henry III., gay king as he was, this position was as grand as the height of one of the loftiest peaks of the Cordilleras. Now Percerin had been a clever man all his life, and by way of keeping up his reputation beyond the grave, took very good care not to make a bad death of it, and so contrived to die very skillfully, and that at the very moment he felt his powers of invention declining. He left a son and a daughter, both worthy of the name they were called upon to bear; the son a cutter as unerring and exact as the square rule; the daughter apt at embroidery and at designing ornaments. The marriage of Henry IV. and Marie de Medici, and the exquisite court mourning for the aforementioned queen, together with a few words let fall by M. de Bassompierre, king of the beaux of the period, made the fortune of the second generation of Percerins. M. Concino Concini and his wife Galigei, who subsequently shone at the French court, sought to Italianize the fashion, and introduce some Florentine tailors; but Percerin, touched to the quick in his patriotism and his self esteem, entirely defeated these foreigners, and that so well that Concino was the first to give up his compatriots, and held the French tailor in such esteem that he would never employ any other, and thus wore a doublet of his on the very day that Vitry blew out his brains with a pistol at the Pont de Louvre. And so it was a doublet issuing from M. Percerin's workshop, which the Parisians rejoiced in hacking into so many pieces with the living human body it contained. Notwithstanding the favor Concino Concini had shown Percerin, the king, Louis XIII., had the generosity to bear no malice to his tailor, and to retain him in his service. At the time that Louis the Just afforded this great example of equity, Percerin had brought up two sons, one of whom made his debut at the marriage of Anne of Austria, invented that admirable Spanish costume, in which Richelieu danced a saraband, made the costumes for the tragedy of Mirame, and stitched onto Buckingham's mantle those famous pearls which were destined to be scattered about the pavements of the Louvre. A man becomes equally notable who has made the dresses of a Duke of Buckingham, a M. de Cinq Mars, a Mademoiselle Ninon, a M. de Beaufort, and a Marianne de Lorme. And thus Percerin III. had attained the summit of his glory when his father died. This same Percerin III., old, famous, and wealthy, yet further dressed Louis XIV., and having no son, which was a great cause of sorrow to him, seeing that with himself his dynasty should end, he had brought up several hopeful pupils. He possessed a carriage, a country house, men servants the tallest in Paris, and, by special authority from Louis XIV., a pack of hounds. He worked for MM. de Lyonne and Letellier, under a sort of patronage, but politic man as he was, and versed in state secrets, he never succeeded in fitting M. Colbert. This is beyond explanation; it is a matter for guessing or for intuition. Great geniuses of every kind live on unseen, intangible ideas; they act without themselves knowing why. The great Percerin, for, contrary to the rule of dynasties, it was, above all, the last of the Percerins who deserved the name of great. The great Percerin was inspired when he cut a robe for the queen, or a coat for the king, He could mount a mantle for monsieur, the clock of a stocking for madame, but in spite of his supreme talent, he could never hit off anything approaching a creditable fit for M. Colbert. "That man," he used often to say, "is beyond my art; my needle can never dot him down." We need scarcely say that Percerin was M. Fouquet's tailor, and that the superintendent highly esteemed him. M. Percerin was nearly 80 years old, nevertheless still fresh, and at the same time so dry, the courtiers used to say, that he was positively brittle. His renown and his fortune were great enough for M. le Prince, that king of fops, to take his arm when talking over the fashions, and for those least eager to pay never to dare to leave their accounts in arrear with him, for Master Percerin would for the first time make clothes upon credit, but the second never, unless paid for the former order. It is easy to see at once that a tailor of such renown, instead of running after customers, made difficulties about obliging any fresh ones, and so Percerin declined to fit bourgeois, or those who had but recently obtained patents of nobility. A story used to circulate that even M. de Mazarin, in exchange for Percerin supplying him with a full suit of ceremonial vestments as cardinal, one fine day slipped letters of nobility into his pocket. It was to the house of this great Lama of tailors that D'Artagnan took the despairing Porthos, who, as they were going along, said to his friend, "Take care, my good D'Artagnan, not to compromise the dignity of a man such as I am, with the arrogance of this Percerin, who will, I expect, be very impertinent; for I give you notice, my friend, that if he is wanting in respect, I will infallibly chastise him." "Presented by me," replied D'Artagnan, "you have nothing to fear, even though you were what you are not."
"Ah! 'tis because
" "What? Have you anything against Percerin, Porthos?"
I think that I once sent Mouston to a fellow of that name."
"And then?"
"The fellow refused to supply me."
"Oh, a misunderstanding, no doubt, which it will be now exceedingly easy to set right. Mouston must have made a mistake."
"Perhaps."
"He has confused the names."
"Possibly. That rascal Mouston never can remember names."
"I will take it all upon myself."
"Very good."
"Stop the carriage, Porthos; here we are."
"Here? How here? We're at the Hall, and you told me the house was at the corner of the Rue de l'Arbre Sec."
"'Tis true; but look."
"Well, I do look, and I see "
"What?"
"Pardieu! That we are at the Halles."
"You do not, I suppose, want our horses to clamber up on the roof of the carriage in front of us?"
"No."
"Nor the carriage in front of us to mount on top of the one in front of it? Nor that the second should be driven over the roofs of the 30 or 40 others which have arrived before us?"
"No, you are right, indeed. What a number of people! And what are they all about?"
"'Tis very simple. They are waiting their turn."
"Bah! Have the comedians of the Hotel de Bourgogne shifted their quarters?"
"No, their turn to obtain an entrance to M. Percerin's house."
"And we are going to wait too?"
"Oh, we shall show ourselves prompter, and not so proud."
"What are we to do then?"
"Get down, pass through the footmen and lackeys, and enter the tailor's house, which I will answer for our doing, if you go first."
"Come along, then,"
said Porthos. They accordingly alighted, and made their way on foot towards the establishment. The cause of the confusion was that M. Percerin's doors were closed, while a servant standing before them was explaining to the illustrious customers of the illustrious tailor that just then M. Percerin could not receive anybody. It was bruited about outside still, on the authority of what the great lackey had told some great noble whom he favored, in confidence, that M. Percerin was engaged on 5 costumes for the king, and that, owing to the urgency of the case, he was meditating in his office on the ornaments, colors, and cut of these 5 suits. Some, contented with this reason, went away again, contented to repeat the tale to others; but others, more tenacious, insisted on having the doors opened, and among these last 3 blue ribbons, intended to take parts in a ballet, which would inevitably fail unless the said 3 had their costumes shaped by the very hand of the great Percerin himself. D'Artagnan, pushing on Porthos, who scattered the groups of people right and left, succeeded in gaining the counter, behind which the journeyman tailors were doing their best to answer queries. We forgot to mention that at the door they wanted to put off Porthos like the rest, but D'Artagnan, showing himself, pronounced merely these words, "The king's order," and was let in with his friend. The poor fellows had enough to do, and did their best, to reply to the demands of the customers in the absence of their master, leaving off drawing a stitch to knit a sentence, and when wounded pride, or disappointed expectation, brought down upon them too cutting a rebuke, he who was attacked made a dive and disappeared under the counter. The line of discontented lords formed a truly remarkable picture. Our captain of musketeers, a man of sure and rapid observation, took it all in at a glance, and having run over the groups, his eye rested on a man in front of him. This man, seated upon a stool, scarcely showed his head above the counter that sheltered him. He was about 40 years of age, with a melancholy aspect, pale face, and soft, luminous eyes. He was looking at D'Artagnan and the rest, with his chin resting upon his hand, like a calm and inquiring amateur. Only on perceiving, and doubtless recognizing, our captain, he pulled his hat down over his eyes. It was this action, perhaps, that attracted D'Artagnan's attention. If so, the gentleman who had pulled down his hat produced an effect entirely different from what he had desired. In other respects his costume was plain, and his hair evenly cut enough for customers, who were not close observers, to take him for a mere tailor's apprentice, perched behind the board, and carefully stitching cloth or velvet. Nevertheless, this man held up his head too often to be very productively employed with his fingers. D'Artagnan was not deceived, not he, and he saw at once that if this man was working at anything, it certainly was not at velvet. "Eh!" said he, addressing this man, "and so you have become a tailor's boy, Monsieur Moliere?" "Hush, Monsieur d'Artagnan," replied the man, softly; "you will make them recognize me." "Well, and what harm?" "The fact is, there is no harm, but " "You were going to say there is no good in doing it, either, is it not so?" "Alas, no, for I was occupied in examining some excellent figures." Go on, Monsieur Moliere. I quite understand the interest you take in the plates; I will not disturb your studies." "Thank you." "But on one condition, that you tell me where Monsieur Percerin really is." "Oh, willingly. In his own room, only " "Only that one can't enter it." "Unapproachable." "For everybody?" "Everybody. He brought me here so that I might be at my ease to make my observations, and then he went away." "Well, my dear Monsieur Moliere, but you will go and tell him I am here." "I!" exclaimed Moliere, in the tone of a courageous dog, from which you snatch the bone it has legitimately gained. "I disturb myself? Ah, Monsieur d'Artagnan, how hard you are upon me!" "If you don't go directly and tell Monsieur Percerin that I am here, my dear Moliere," said D'Artagnan in a low tone, "I warn you of one thing, that I won't exhibit to you the friend I have brought with me." Moliere indicated Porthos by an imperceptible gesture. "This gentleman, is it not?" "Yes." Moliere fixed upon Porthos one of those looks which penetrate the minds and hearts of men. The subject doubtless appeared a very promising one, for he immediately rose and led the way into the adjoining chamber. Chapter IV. The Patterns. During all this time the noble mob was slowly heaving away, leaving at every angle of the counter either a murmur or a menace, as the waves leave foam or scattered seaweed on the sands, when they retire with the ebbing tide. In about 10 minutes Moliere reappeared, making another sign to D'Artagnan from under the hangings. The latter hurried after him, with Porthos in the rear, and after threading a labyrinth of corridors, introduced him to M. Percerin's room. The old man, with his sleeves turned up, was gathering up in folds a piece of gold flowered brocade, so as the better to exhibit its luster. Perceiving D'Artagnan, he put the silk aside, and came to meet him, by no means radiant with joy, and by no means courteous, but, take it altogether, in a tolerably civil manner. "The captain of the king's musketeers will excuse me, I am sure, for I am engaged." "Eh! yes, on the king's costumes. I know that, my dear Monsieur Percerin. You are making 3, they tell me." "5, my dear sir, 5." 3 or 5, 'tis all the same to me, my dear monsieur, and I know that you will make them most exquisitely." "Yes, I know. Once made, they will be the most beautiful in the world. I do not deny it. But that they may be the most beautiful in the world, they must first be made, and to do this, captain, I am pressed for time." "Oh, bah! there are 2 days yet; 'tis much more than you require, Monsieur Percerin," said D'Artagnan, in the coolest possible manner. Percerin raised his head with the air of a man little accustomed to be contradicted even in his whims, but D'Artagnan did not pay the least attention to the airs which the illustrious tailor began to assume. "My dear Monsieur Percerin," he continued, "I bring you a customer." "Ah! ah!" exclaimed Percerin, crossly. "Monsieur le Baron de Vallon de Bracieux et Pierrefonds," continued D'Artagnan. Percerin attempted a bow, which found no favor in the eyes of the terrible Porthos, who, from his first entry into the room, had been regarding the tailor askance. "A very good friend of mine," concluded D'Artagnan. "I will attend to monsieur," said Percerin, "but later." "Later? But when?" "When I have time." "You have already told my valet as much," broke in Porthos, discontentedly. "Very likely," said Percerin. "I am nearly always pushed for time." "My friend," returned Porthos, sententiously, "there is always time to be found when one chooses to seek it." Percerin turned crimson, an ominous sign, indeed, in old men blanched by age. "Monsieur is quite at liberty to confer his custom elsewhere." "Come, come, Percerin," interposed D'Artagnan, "you are not in a good temper to day. Well, I will say one more word to you, which will bring you on your knees. Monsieur is not only a friend of mine, but more, a friend of M. Fouquet's." "Ah! ah!" exclaimed the tailor, "that is another thing." Then turning to Porthos, "Monsieur le Baron is attached to the superintendent?" he inquired. "I am attached to myself," shouted Porthos, at the very moment that the tapestry was raised to introduce a new speaker in the dialogue. Moliere was all observation. D'Artagnan laughed. Porthos swore. "My dear Percerin," said D'Artagnan, "you will make a dress for the baron? 'Tis I who ask you." "To you I will not say nay, captain." "But that is not all; you will make it for him at once." "'Tis impossible within 8 days." "That, then, is as much as to refuse, because the dress is wanted for the fete at Vaux." "I repeat that it is impossible," returned the obstinate old man. "By no means, my dear Monsieur Percerin, above all if I ask you," said a mild voice at the door, a silvery voice which made D'Artagnan prick up his ears. It was the voice of Aramis. "Monsieur d'Herblay!" cried the tailor. "Aramis!" murmured D'Artagnan.
"Ah! our bishop!" said Porthos.
Good morning, D'Artagnan. Good morning, Porthos. Good morning, my dear friends," said Aramis. "Come, come, Monsieur Percerin, make the baron's dress, and I will answer for it, you will gratify Monsieur Fouquet." And he accompanied the words with a sign which seemed to say, "Agree and dismiss them." It appeared that Aramis had over Master Percerin an influence superior even to D'Artagnan's, for the tailor bowed in assent, and turning round upon Porthos, said, "Go and get measured on the other side." Porthos colored in a formidable manner. D'Artagnan saw the storm coming, and addressing Moliere, said to him in an undertone, "You see before you, my dear monsieur, a man who considers himself disgraced if you measure the flesh and bones that Heaven has given him. Study this type for me, Master Aristophanes, and profit by it." Moliere had no need of encouragement, and his gaze dwelt long and keenly on the Baron Porthos. "Monsieur," he said, "if you will come with me, I will make them take your measure without touching you."
"Oh!" said Porthos, "how do you make that out, my friend?"
"I say that they shall apply neither line nor rule to the seams of your dress. It is a new method we have invented for measuring people of quality, who are too sensitive to allow low born fellows to touch them. We know some susceptible people who will not put up with being measured, a process which, as I think, wounds the natural dignity of a man, and if perchance monsieur should be one of these "
"Corboeuf! I believe I am, too."
"Well, that is a capital and most consolatory coincidence, and you shall have the benefit of our invention."
"But how in the world can it be done?" asked Porthos, delighted.
"Monsieur," said Moliere, bowing, "if you will deign to follow me, you will see." Aramis observed this scene with all his eyes. Perhaps he fancied from D'Artagnan's liveliness that he would leave with Porthos, so as not to lose the conclusion of a scene well begun. But, clear sighted as he was, Aramis deceived himself. Porthos and Moliere left together. D'Artagnan remained with Percerin. Why? From curiosity, doubtless; probably to enjoy a little longer the society of his good friend Aramis. As Moliere and Porthos disappeared, D'Artagnan drew near the bishop of Vannes, a proceeding which appeared particularly to disconcert him. "A dress for you also, is it not, my friend?" Aramis smiled. "No," said he. "You will go to Vaux, however?" "I shall go, but without a new dress. You forget, dear D'Artagnan, that a poor bishop of Vannes is not rich enough to have new dresses for every fete." "Bah!" said the musketeer, laughing. "And do we write no more poems now, either?"
"Oh, D'Artagnan," exclaimed Aramis, "I have long ago given up all such tomfoolery."
"True," repeated D'Artagnan, only half convinced. As for Percerin, he was once more absorbed in contemplation of the brocades.
"Don't you perceive," said Aramis, smiling, "that we are greatly boring this good gentleman, my dear D'Artagnan?"
"Ah!" murmured the musketeer, aside. "That is, I am boring you, my friend." Then aloud, "Well, then, let us leave. I have no further business here, and if you are as disengaged as I, Aramis " "No, not I. I wished " "Ah! you had something particular to say to Monsieur Percerin. Why did you not tell me so at once?"
"Something particular, certainly," repeated Aramis, "but not for you, D'Artagnan. But at the same time I hope you will believe that I can never have anything so particular to say that a friend like you may not hear it."
"Oh, no, no, I'm going," said D'Artagnan, imparting to his voice an evident tone of curiosity, for Aramis's annoyance, well dissembled as it was, had not a whit escaped him, and he knew that, in that impenetrable mind, everything, even the most apparently trivial, was designed to some end, an unknown one, but an end that, from the knowledge he had of his friend's character, the musketeer felt must be important. On his part, Aramis saw that D'Artagnan was not without suspicion, and pressed him. "Stay, by all means," he said. "This is what it is." Then turning towards the tailor, "My dear Percerin," said he, "I am even very happy that you are here, D'Artagnan." "Oh, indeed!" exclaimed the Gascon, for the third time, even less deceived this time than before. Percerin never moved. Aramis roused him violently, by snatching from his hands the stuff upon which he was engaged. "My dear Percerin," said he, "I have near hand M. Lebrun, one of M. Fouquet's painters." "Ah! very good," thought D'Artagnan; "but why Lebrun?" Aramis looked at D'Artagnan, who seemed to be occupied with an engraving of Mark Antony. "And you wish that I should make him a dress, similar to those of the Epicureans?" answered Percerin; and while saying this in an absent manner the worthy tailor endeavored to recapture his piece of brocade. "An Epicurean's dress?" asked D'Artagnan, in a tone of inquiry. "I see," said Aramis, with a most engaging smile. "It is written that our dear D'Artagnan shall know all our secrets this evening. Yes, friend, you have surely heard speak of M. Fouquet's Epicureans, have you not?" "Undoubtedly. Is it not a kind of poetical society, of which La Fontaine, Loret, Pelisson, and Moliere are members, and which holds its sittings at Saint Mande?" "Exactly so. Well, we are going to put our poets in uniform, and enroll them in a regiment for the king." "Oh! very well, I understand; a surprise M. Fouquet is getting up for the king. Be at ease; if that is the secret about M. Lebrun, I will not mention it." "Always agreeable, my friend. No, M. Lebrun has nothing to do with this part of it. The secret which concerns him is far more important than the other." "Then, if it is so important as all that, I prefer not to know it," said D'Artagnan, making a show of departure. "Come in, M. Lebrun, come in," said Aramis, opening a side door with his right hand, and holding back D'Artagnan with his left. "In faith, too, I am quite in the dark," quoth Percerin. Aramis took an opportunity, as is said in theatrical matters. "My dear Monsieur de Percerin," Aramis continued, "you are making 5 dresses for the king, are you not? One in brocade, one in hunting cloth, one in velvet, one in satin, and one in Florentine stuffs." "Yes! But how do you know all that, monseigneur?" said Percerin, astounded. "It is all very simple, my dear monsieur. There will be a hunt, a banquet, concert, promenade, and reception. These 5 kinds of dress are required by etiquette." "You know everything, monseigneur." "And a thing or two in addition," muttered D'Artagnan. "But," cried the tailor in triumph, "what you do not know, monseigneur, prince of the church though you are, what nobody will know, what only the king, Mademoiselle de la Valliere, and myself do know, is the color of the materials and nature of the ornaments, and the cut, the ensemble, and the finish of it all." "Well," said Aramis, "that is precisely what I have come to ask you, dear Percerin." "Bah! bah!" exclaimed the tailor, terrified, though Aramis had pronounced these words in his softest and most honeyed tones. The request appeared, on reflection, so exaggerated, so ridiculous, so monstrous, to M. Percerin, that first he laughed to himself, then aloud, and finished with a shout. D'Artagnan followed his example, not because he found the matter so very funny, but in order not to allow Aramis to cool. "At the outset, I appear to be hazarding an absurd question, do I not?" said Aramis. "But D'Artagnan, who is incarnate wisdom itself, will tell you that I could not do this otherwise than ask you this." "Let us see," said the attentive musketeer, perceiving with his wonderful instinct that they had only been skirmishing till now, and that the hour of battle was approaching. "Let us see," said Percerin, incredulously. "Why, now," continued Aramis, "does M. Fouquet give the king a fete? Is it not to please him?" "Assuredly," said Percerin. D'Artagnan nodded assent. "By delicate attentions? By some happy device? By a succession of surprises, like that of which we are talking? The enrolment of our Epicureans?" "Admirable." "Well, then, this is the surprise we intend. M. Lebrun here is a man who draws most excellently." "Yes," said Percerin, "I have seen his pictures, and observed that his dresses were highly elaborated. That is why I at once agreed to make him a costume, whether to agree with those of the Epicureans, or an original one." "My dear monsieur, we accept your offer, and shall presently avail ourselves of it. But just now, M. Lebrun is not in want of the dresses you will make for himself, but of those you are making for the king." Percerin made a bound backwards, which D'Artagnan, calmest and most appreciative of men, did not consider overdone, so many strange and startling aspects wore the proposal which Aramis had just hazarded. "The king's dresses! Give the king's dresses to any mortal whatever! Oh! for once, monseigneur, your grace is mad!" cried the poor tailor in extremity. "Help me now, D'Artagnan," said Aramis, more and more calm and smiling; "help me now to persuade monsieur, for you understand, do you not?" "Eh? eh? Not exactly, I declare." "What! You do not understand that M. Fouquet wishes to afford the king the surprise of finding his portrait on his arrival at Vaux, and that the portrait, which be a striking resemblance, ought to be dressed exactly as the king will be on the day it is shown?" "Oh! yes, yes," said the musketeer, nearly convinced, so plausible was this reasoning. "Yes, my dear Aramis, you are right; it is a happy idea. I will wager it is one of your own, Aramis." "Well, I don't know," replied the bishop; "either mine or M. Fouquet's." Then scanning Percerin, after noticing D'Artagnan's hesitation, "Well, Monsieur Percerin," he asked, "what do you say to this?" "I say that you are doubtless free to refuse. I know well, and I by no means count upon compelling you, my dear monsieur. I will say more, I even understand all the delicacy you feel in taking up with M. Fouquet's idea. You dread appearing to flatter the king. A noble spirit, Monsieur Percerin, a noble spirit." The tailor stammered. "It would indeed be a very pretty compliment to pay the young prince," continued Aramis; "but as the superintendent told me, if Percerin refuse, tell him that it will not at all lower him in my opinion, and I shall always esteem him only " "Only?" repeated Percerin, rather troubled. "Only," continued Aramis, "I shall be compelled to say to the king, you understand, my dear Monsieur Percerin, that these are M. Fouquet's words? I shall be constrained to say to the king, 'Sire, I had intended to present your majesty with your portrait, but owing to a feeling of delicacy, slightly exaggerated perhaps, although creditable, M. Percerin opposed the project.'" "Opposed!" cried the tailor, terrified at the responsibility which would weigh upon him. "I to oppose the desire, the will of M. Fouquet when he is seeking to please the king! Oh, what a hateful word you have uttered, monseigneur! Oppose! Oh, 'tis not I who said it. Heaven have mercy on me! I call the captain of the musketeers to witness it. Is it not true, Monsieur d'Artagnan, that I have opposed nothing?" D'Artagnan made a sign indicating he wished to remain neutral. He felt that there was an intrigue at the bottom of it, whether comedy or tragedy, he was at his wits' end at not being able to fathom it, but in the meanwhile wished to keep clear. But already Percerin, goaded by the idea that the king was to be told he stood in the way of a pleasant surprise, had offered Lebrun a chair, and proceeded to bring from a wardrobe 4 magnificent dresses, the 5th being still in the workman's hands, and these masterpieces he successively fitted upon 4 lay figures, which, imported into France in the time of Concini, had been given to Percerin too by Marshal d'Honor, after the discomfiture of the Italian tailors ruined in their competition. The painter set to work to draw and then to paint the dresses. But Aramis, who was closely watching all the phases of his toil, suddenly stopped him. "I think you have not quite got it, my dear Lebrun," he said. "Your colors will deceive you, and on canvas we shall lack that exact resemblance which is absolutely requisite. Time is necessary for attentively observing the finer shades." "Quite true," said Percerin, "but time is wanting, and on that head you will agree with me, monseigneur, I can do nothing." "Then the affair will fail," said Aramis, quietly, "and that because of a want of precision in the colors." Nevertheless, Lebrun went on copying the materials and ornaments with the closest fidelity, a process which Aramis watched with ill concealed impatience. "What in the world, now, is the meaning of this imbroglio?" the musketeer kept saying to himself. "That will never do," said Aramis. "Monsieur Lebrun, close your box, and roll up your canvas."
"But, monsieur," cried the vexed painter, "the light is abominable here."
"An idea, Monsieur Lebrun, an idea. If we had a pattern of the materials, for example, and with time, at a better light "
"Oh, then," cried Lebrun, "I would answer for the effect."
"Good," said D'Artagnan. "This ought to be the knotty point of the whole thing. They want a pattern of each of the materials. Mordioux! Will this Percerin give in now?" Percerin, beaten from his last retreat, and duped, moreover, by the feigned good nature of Aramis, cut out 5 patterns and handed them to the bishop of Vannes. "I like this better. That is your opinion, is it not?" said Aramis to D'Artagnan. "My dear Aramis," said D'Artagnan, "my opinion is that you are always the same." "And consequently, always your friend," said the bishop in a charming tone. "Yes, yes," said D'Artagnan aloud; then, in a low voice, "if I am your dupe, double Jesuit that you are, I will not be your accomplice; and to prevent it, 'tis time I left this place. Adieu, Aramis," he added aloud, "adieu; I am going to rejoin Porthos." "Then wait for me," said Aramis, pocketing the patterns, "for I have done, and shall be glad to say a parting word to our dear old friend." Lebrun packed up his paints and brushes, Percerin put back the dresses into the closet, Aramis put his hand on his pocket to assure himself the patterns were secure, and they all left the study.